is up, YouTube? So, it is just me today. Tom smokes the pussy and he's back to training nights. We are back to a leg day. Now I've just come off a sickness, so pretty much haven't trained legs properly for about 2 weeks. First week was the back end of my exam block, so pretty much just knuckled down a few extra days and just deloaded and focused on study, which paid off, so make sure you do your study. And then I got sick, so I had about 3 days of just feeling like absolute garbage and pretty much got nothing done. So this will be the first leg session back in about 2 weeks, and it's right at the peak of a mini cut. So we got about 3 weeks in now. We'll probably run it for another 2 to 3 weeks with the intention to strip off as much fat as possible before America, to then come back and grow as hard as I can. So strength is definitely diminished, but we're going to try and replicate as much or match as much strength as possible in the leg session with as much control as we can, and just focus on maintaining as much muscle tissue as possible. So we got squat press, hamstring curls, leg extensions, calf raises, bit of core work, and yeah, should be nice and easy, but not easy. And now I'm just going to try and loosen everything up because I spent 3 days in bed, and thanks to 3 days in bed, my entire spine inflamed and basically my lumbar locked up and I couldn't move very well. So now we're trying to loosen that up and free it out. Alright, so here's a neat little trick you can do to improve range of motion. Now, when we're doing things like this, we want to keep our hips as square or on the pad as possible. So, to do that, sometimes, like for myself, my range of motion is a limiting factor to the movement, sometimes. So once I get warmed up, I can get a lot deeper, but at the same time, I don't want my hips to raise off the pad. So we're going to roll this up, put it under my glutes, my hips, lets me sit a little bit higher. That's going to enable me to get a larger degree of knee flexion and a fuller range of motion. So I'm going to get a lot more out of my quads per rep than if I just didn't use it. So a really good point actually on, it's not a question, but a really good point on sickness is there's something obviously hard for me to isolate myself, not train, not work, not study, not do anything for a couple of days. But the idea is obviously, like, you got to look at or think about how sick am I? How sick is the sickness? Like how severe is the sickness I've got? Is going to training, is going to do work, is doing things going to potentiate further exacerbation of those symptoms? Or is it going to make me feel better? We know that when you train, there's actually a decrease in the immune system's response, or basically a downregulation for a period of time. So if you're sick or on the verge of being sick, or you're noticing symptoms, going to train when it's potentially a worse sickness than what it could be. So like, you might think you just got a head cold, ends up you got a chest infection and a flu or something like that. You go and train, makes that worse. It's going to lead to a longer downturn or downtime from being sick than if you just took some time off and rested. So you got to be smart in how you approach sickness. It's not, I'm a hard fucking CUNT and I'm as tough as nails because I train through sickness. It's what's the point of training through that sickness if you've got to rest now an extra week? what is the point of a mini cut? Okay, so at the moment, we are 3 weeks into a pretty aggressive mini cut. Now there's a few ways you can approach it. There's several ways you can approach it. Some people prefer to cut a little aggressively, a little less aggressively. Might do a more drawn out approach. Again, it's gonna depend on capabilities of the client. What's their history of dieting, history of training, or you might call it their nutritional knowledge, their dieting age, like we call it training age. Aggressive cuts probably aren't something I'd recommend for people who haven't done degrees of dieting before. A drastic reduction in calories for a short period of time. If you haven't been exposed to it before, it's pretty rough. But if you look at the bigger picture and you zoom out, if we're trying to continually grow to be bodybuilders, we've obviously got weaknesses. Like, I am very well aware that I have a lot of weaknesses when it comes to my physique. I'm at no point claiming I'm the next pro out of Australia. What we're trying to do is spend as much time potentiating growth as possible and spend as little time in a deficit, which is obviously not an anabolic environment. So we're trying to add material, add size, we're trying to add resources. That means a surplus. It means calories coming in, good sleep, like hard training, heavy training, strength going up, etc. Now, if I'm spending all my time cutting, that's going to be obviously not as net positive towards growth as I want it. So with a mini cut, you isolate a small window of time. It could be 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever it is. In that time, you're trying to peel off as much fat mass as possible whilst retaining as much muscle tissue as possible. Obviously, the degree of deficit that's aggressive, especially if you're an enhanced athlete, can be better because we're retaining muscle tissue. We're using supplementation and high protein to retain muscle, or what's called muscle sparing. Now, that can be different for everyone, but for me, we jack up protein a little bit, pull the shit down out of carbs. At the moment, I'm running net 0 carbs, basically just vegetables and 2 pieces of fruit a day for health. But besides that, it's just proteins and fats, a little bit of sauce. So the idea has been not only trying to pull down fat mass, but if I'm trying to drive up growth in the next 6 months, which is the plan, we want to go from 100 kilos to about, plan will be ideally 115, pretty lean. So if we're trying to do that, there's going to be a high degree of food, high degree of supplementation, high degree of training. At a certain point, your growth phase hits a cap where you're just you have no appetite, no satiety, you've actually lost motivation, your training intensity is probably down because you're so full from food, your body isn't digesting it properly, it's just not processing food properly, you're not really growing any better because you're eating more. So we take a few steps back, peel off a few layers. Not only are we dropping body fat, but we're also going to increase hunger, decrease fullness, or satiety, excuse me. We're going to increase the drive and motivation of growing again by taking a few steps back, taking some layers off and making us hungry. So there's a few net benefits to a mini cut. You only need to do it 4, 6, 8 weeks. But if you think about it, 4 to 8 weeks versus 6 months of growing, I'd rather that than a 3-month cut and then 3 months of growing. So that's how we approach it. It's why I like it so much, is that I know my weaknesses and I need to spend as much time growing as possible. That's going to mean as less time cutting as possible. So you suck it up, bite the bullet, get as aggressive as you can. You're going to be just as hungry in the mini cut as you are going to be full in your off season. So take both sides of the coin. Alrighty, so bit of a specificity change. We've moved the exercise order of the hamstring curl. However, we've got 4 sets on this movement now when we used to have 2 top sets and a back off. So 25% increase in load over 2 sessions, so another 2 sets. And we're going to take all of them to failure. So again, this RAR bullshit training reserve, all that crap that everyone likes to work from. It's fine, but we're also trying to potentiate growth and drive specificity, so we're smashing the hammies. Thoughts on everything being optimal? At the moment, there's a big push with looking at everything as optimal, or how to like optimize every inch of everything. And it's great to have a standardized process of operation. That makes complete sense. But at a certain point, we know that when we're looking at optimal, it's generalized data to the mass of the study that was conducted, right? So we're looking at the generability of the studies that we're pulling the data from. How applicable to the real world or generalizable is this topic, this concept, this result of the population that's being studied? Now, am I that population? Am I within that means of that group? Do I have the same lifestyle criteria perhaps that they had? The likelihood is no. Once we get to the individual level, we have to start looking at the individual aspect of it. And that means that, you know, what's optimal for one person might not be achievable for someone else. If we get too caught up in the mind frame of perfection or optimization and nothing else matters, we actually discourage people from training and doing shit. It's part of the way we're going to describe the topic in our presentation in America. We work back from optimal and we coach where the person is. We don't assume them to be at our level. So how optimal I can be, so my 7 to 9 hours, I go to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock every night, I wake up at 6 or 7. I make sure I get X amount of food, X amount of water, this many meals based on my protein. If I have someone who's a former athlete or something like that, but is now a mum of 2 kids or a husband of 2 kids and works night shift, the likelihood that they're getting the circadian rhythm that's in check, the likelihood that they're getting, you know, the right amount of sleep, the right amount of recovery, the right amount of food is pretty low. Their priorities have shifted. And then on top of that, movement patterns and mechanics, yes, optimal ranges of motion, optimal lengthened positions, optimal setups in a machine. But if we're overthinking everything, you take out the fun and enjoyment of just fucking training hard. There needs to be a fine-tuned point with the individual person where we're going, what's the optimal way to be? How can I manipulate this machine if I need to? But can I get in and just do the fucking thing? So if we spend half an hour per set trying, like, I've got to twist this and do this here and modify this way, yes, great if you have the time to do so, but how many clients do you have of a general populace that have the time to be like, okay, I've got that 45-degree angle here, lock in here, make sure I've got this seat set up, and I can really just get this squeeze out of my lat here and do this 3 sets, then go set up the same thing down there and set up the same thing over there. When there's a fucking machine 3 feet away that will literally do that, just a little less optimal for them. At the end of the day, working back from optimum is great, but not every single person is going to have the availability of optimal. So to me, I'll find what is optimal for that person, what's getting a response, and most people really, before worrying about optimizing the range of motion, or optimizing the machine to perfection, optimizing the most minute detail of like protein spacing or meal timing spacing and frequency, is can I get them to do the big blocks first? Sleep better, eat more food, hydrate better, stick to the basic supplements, train the basic movement patterns correctly, and then worry about moving beyond that. That's how I view optimal. And also half the time people talking about fucking optimal look like shit. Fucking 80 fucking kilo skin rats that don't really train hard in the first place. Let me tell you about the lengthened position of the partial rep, but you just fucking train. Woo! Oh, gonna hurt doing shit today. Oh. Woo. Another good question actually that I'll get into, which is nutrition and training on holidays. So, we've had a bit of a, not an influx, but an increase recently of clients doing like mid-year holidays and mid-year traveling trips. Now, there's several ways I like to approach it. Again, depends on the client goal spectrum. This is something we're going to try and, we're coining the phrase basically, especially for the presentation in America. When you look at the goal and the population, and where they stand, right? So if we've got, the way we kind of conduct the spectrum is like, your general person who just wants to improve body composition, meaning like they want to drop a few pounds, shed some body fat, look a little tighter in their bikini or their fucking swim trunks. Then we've got elite bodybuilder. On the body composition spectrum, it's a continuum. It's not like Susan, who wants to drop some weight, is going to be coached the same way as Phil, who wants to be on stage at 3% body fat. Phil wants to get shredded, apparently. What we have to do then is look at, okay, where does this person fit on this bill, on this spectrum, and what are their goals? Because if there's someone who wants to be on stage and they want to travel, likelihood is there's going to be a lot more rigidity in that travel, and they have to pick somewhere with more controlled locations and be more conscious of their food selection and activity levels to offset the traveling, meaning like the less control over food, less excitement of food. They're not going to go out and eat the same places that their friends might be or their partners might be. You're going to be a lot more controlled in what you're doing if you wish to do that. Whereas if you're in like the general population, I don't need to worry about a stage or being an athlete sort of level, but you're trying to optimize things a bit better, you're trying to improve things a bit more, we'll look more so at what are the basics we can do on holidays. And this is what I give people, is generally some rules, some guidelines or frameworks to work in on the trip, and then they're free to do what they want. It's kind of how I approach it if you work with me. You're not just going to get a, hey, see you later, go do whatever you want, fuck you. You will just waste 6 months of our life from all the training. So we're going to look at things like, we're still getting 5 serves of fruit and veg. Did some research yesterday for an article piece I wrote. Less than 5% of Australians reach the recommended, according to the 2021 ABS data, less than 5% of Australians reach the recommended 5 serves of veg and 2 serves of fruit in a day. 5% of people don't hit the basic recommendation, let alone trying to train and optimize or enhance recovery and performance and fueling. So on trips, you're going to still get 5 serves of veg. I don't care what they are. I don't care if it's broccolini or if it's fucking cauliflower, or if it's capsicum or if it's carrot and fucking mushrooms, whatever. You're getting it in. 2 serves of fruit. Everyone can find, whether it's a fucking bodega in America or it's a fucking bazaar in the Middle East, or you're in somewhere that's got some sort of marketing, you're going to find 2 pieces of fruit. Don't care what they are, get them in. Then we're going to try and space out some protein. So that means that every meal you have, ideally, you're going to seek protein first on your plate. Nice and simple. And then hydrate. Most of the places you're going to, if you're not on that spectrum of elite bodybuilder, there's probably going to be some alcohol, probably going to be some lack of sleeping, like large amounts of activity, so you're going to dehydrate. And you're probably going to train, because I'm going to make you train. So, you need to hydrate. So all we're doing over there is setting more so, less restriction, but more so some parameters. And inside that, once you tick those boxes, do the fuck you want. You're gonna have some takeaway, or you wanna have something different, you're gonna have some nice food, fantastic. But tick those boxes and you can still enjoy yourself. It's the conscious difference between being an asshole on your holiday and throwing away all the work you've done and being conscious of not being an asshole. That's as simple as it is. So that's just how I approach it, to make sure that you can still go enjoy yourself, but you're not throwing away all the money and time and work you spent working with us, because that's the point of matter. We're taking the average person and showing them how to be a higher level of performance and operation. This is what high performance people do. You don't have Michael Jordan go on holidays in the peak of his NBA career and suddenly he's just absolutely sending it on shit food, no training, and Tim Grover saying, hey, do whatever you want. He's probably gonna have a cigar and a whiskey, but he's still doing all the things that he needs to be the elite basketballer. Same sort of premise, just less extreme. Really easy training tip to identify your failure point is set a criteria of range of motion that you determine is no longer a countable rep. From there, it's very easy to work back from how you'll reach failure. That last rep was not a rep. Once you have that, you know where your failure point is. It's a lot easier to work from technical failure. So for everyone who's not playing at home, we've also brought on Rowan now. Now, I just want to emphasize that this is not because we're a packed team or like the team's full and we're overcrowding ourselves. It's because we want to diversify the range of helping people. I have very specific specialities. Now, my education is in psychology, behavioral change, behavioral science, and mindset, for lack of a better term, which I hate people using, motivational research, things like that, and obviously body composition, bodybuilding preps, performance in optimizing those aspects. But I also work with a spectrum along that clientele. Roland's just finished his master's degree in strength and conditioning. He's also a certified physio, a qualified physio. And obviously Tom has his specialities around strength and conditioning, general populist performance, strength training, things like that as well. So we're just trying to diversify who Matter reaches at a higher level. So, you don't have to come to us just to be a bodybuilder, but at the same time now, Rowan has his niche of person that we're scoping out and working with and giving him access to get more experience with population coaching versus like rehabilitation and physio. So he's, his books are open, my books are open still. The team is still there to work with. It's just that we're trying to diversify and expand how we can help the general audience, because our goal is genuinely to increase the standard of coaching in Australia, and eventually, as we're going overseas to present things, internationally, there's going to be a better standard of coaching. So we're trying to make sure that across Matter, there is a standard of procedure that is expected to work in. That is, you don't need to be an elite at what you do, but we're going to help you become elite at optimizing your life. So what you're trying to get out of, we're going to maximize and help you perform it at your best. That's the point. Taking the average person who doesn't know how to be better and teach them what the greats did to be the best. You don't have to be the best, but you have to be better, trying to be better at what you're trying to do. So that's any spectrum, or that's any field. And so bringing on Rowan really is just to help us expand that level of reach and accessibility to people, and make sure that we're enhancing the client expectation of what we're trying to get out of things, and actually what we're trying to achieve as a client, you can expect more from, right? So yeah, Rowan coming on, he's already got like, what do you got? He's already got a handful of clients. He started literally on the books last week, contract signed and things like that. And so he's on the team now officially as a coach, and he's already starting to get a handful of clients going. So we're just going to keep pumping that out for him and just keep that going. So ideally the goal becomes that he just becomes a full-time online coach for us, and just increases who we can work with and expand the team. So yeah, it's just obviously that's a work in progress and things that we're expecting to take time, but seeing where we want Matter to go and what we want Matter to do, it's the next logical step in how we get there. So that's what we're doing. Okay, fresh. This is a pretty good one. What are common traits, or what are the common traits you see in successful clients, or in a successful client? Now, this is not going to dig at anyone. Obviously, there's a different variety of clients we work with, and we try and build, a lot of these things we try and build a client to have, should they ever decide to leave us and not need us. So the point is either we work up to it, or we build you to have it, or we can identify those innate traits that people generally have that are quite successful. And the really easy thing to say as a coach is you see the type A, high conscientious, industrious, task-orientated client. They're very easy and regimented to work with, to plan out, structure, everything's routine, everything's systemized. They just want to execute the job and the numbers. However, that can become kind of inverse once we get to neuroticism, and they're a bit more emotional, a bit more neurotic about the goal, about the task, because too much stimulus, too much overworking, overthinking, coming off track or missing a day leads to anxieties, insecurities, body image issues, things like that. So that's a fine line to walk. But successful traits that aren't, I guess, like the innate big five personality traits, you're gonna see things that are like, yes, someone is quite goal orientated. They know where they're going because they've thought about it, they've mapped it out. Having that trait to know where you're going and what you're trying to achieve long before anyone else sees it is one of the most successful traits in anyone, regardless of a client type or goal. Being able to see where you're going and why you're going there and what the plan looks like to achieve it is beyond necessary. The, I guess, other thing you see is the ability to delay gratification. Again, knowing where you want to go and trading off the things you want now for that goal in the future. Those two things combined become very powerful tools for a person or a client. And then I guess you start looking at like things, it's like resilience, effort, intensity. Being able to put in the work when you are so far away from the goal, no matter how close you are when you see it or how far away it is when you look at it, being able to put in the work consistently and work towards achieving that goal, even when shit gets in the way. That resilience, mental fortitude, mental toughness, whatever you want to call it, those three things kind of go hand in hand. And I guess it like that, well, I mean, in a very short-winded way, sums up the values that we reflect as a business. Purpose, intensity, and consistency. So you kind of reframe how I just described those things. That's what you really get on the back of our shirts. You have those things, and I think we can pretty much take any client and make them successful at what they're trying to do. And that's not a brag on me. That's a very, very responsive client, because I know if I say something and I tell them why we're doing it and they mapped out the plan to do it, that the result's going to occur. It's just a matter of time. So the big thing for me is when you give me that stuff, I just give you a when, not an if. Or you give me a when and not an if. Because with those parts of the equation, it becomes non-negotiable that it's going to happen. It's just over a period of time. So I'd say those are probably three of the biggest traits that we see in clients successfully. Would be, well, the three values we stand by: purpose, consistency, intensity. As I said on the Coach Catalyst podcast, you do those three things, it's undoubtable that you're going to succeed at anything you do in life to some degree. Everything you do should have a purpose to some extent. You should be able to do it consistently towards something that you love doing, which should be your purpose. And there should be a degree of intensity towards it at a bare minimum. So, looking at, even on your worst days, what's the best effort you can give versus like, oh, I'll give nothing, or like, had a shit day, so I'm not going to do anything. On your worst day, what's the least amount you can give, and how can I make that higher? And that'll be the governing factor that determines your result. Back end of exercise, thoughts on exercise selection, the back end of prep. That's kind of an easy one. It makes the most sense. Like, depends on the person. I find like natural strengths and things across the prep. Generally, if I'm finding someone's performance is down regulating or diminishing, we'll look at, well, the main point of the back end of prep, right, is if we get ahead of it, we're trying to brush off fatigue and bring a nice fresh look to stage. We're trying to maintain as much muscle as possible, so yes, strength. However, we're not trying to grow, we're trying to build. We're trying to maintain stimulus to retain as much muscle tissue as possible. That means more mechanical tension and a degree of progressive overload, or at least maintenance of what we can. Now, that doesn't mean that you go and add a shit ton of heavy compound movements. You're trying to train like zero RAR, 1 week out. Instead, what we're looking for is we can get close to that proximity to failure, but given that fatigue is going to be so high, exhaustion is so high, depletion is coming, you're really hungry, you're low on food, the probably last 8 weeks is where I'll make probably the last exercise changes before that sort of 2-week peak block. And realistically, we're looking at taking away from external stability exercises, meaning a lot more free weights, a lot more dumbbells or presses that are, bench presses, things like that, overhead presses. And we're going to move to a more internalized stability versus externalized stability. We're going to move away from the body being a stabilizer, because that's going to create more fatigue, it's going to require more effort. It's not going to be able to go to directly the machine, right? More stability equals more force, more tension, more growth. We're going to look at bringing in machines that are going to help achieve the same movement pattern, but require less effort to stabilize and control. So, dumbbell press for a chest press, dumbbell or standing shoulder press for machine shoulder press. Working on things like machine rows or single hand low rows instead of bent over rows, barbell rows. Just stuff that's going to be a lot more taxing for the same amount of stimulus. We're going to swap for something less taxing, maximize the stimulus, the tension, and the control. So the back end of prep, we have as fresh a physique as possible with the most muscle tissue. So yeah, it's just a nice, easy way to adjust that there. You don't need a lot of drastic changes. It just might be simply moving the machine or changing the exercise option, not the exercise itself. So, dumbbell shoulder press to machine shoulder press. Internal stability, external stabilizer.
I'll hit a couple really quickly. There's smaller ones, but biggest training regrets and why is posing so important? Biggest training regrets, I think, was not putting time into understanding things sooner. I just used to go in and send it and love it, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't take time to understand recovery as much, sleep as much. You know, there was a point in time in my training career where I was working 12 hours a day, 2 hours away from, an hour away from where I lived, 12 hours a day. Yeah, so it was like a 14-hour day's work. Then I'd come back and play footy or do footy training. Then I'd go to the gym and then I'd have to wake up and go to work. And it was like, you know, just points in time where I was thinking more was more, and it was never more was better. And that just led me to like a lot of recovery problems and you know, issues that just weren't optimal for recovery, if you will, for the lack of a better term. But like in terms of training regrets, like I've had a variety of training practices over the years that I've loved all of them. Rugby league, swimming, you know, touch, parts of AFL. You know, I've done things like, you know, training for bodybuilding, different styles of training protocols, pyramid setting, fucking drop setting, just setting it to failure every rep, maximum sets, like just things where you've sent it. And now I found that nice niche of what works for me. But yeah, I guess like the biggest regret was just less understanding sooner. And that's probably led me to why I coach the way I do. I want to take as many young guys as possible and not shortchange the distance of time it took me to learn from them. So, you know, it took me 10 years to get from A to B. I want them to be able to do it in 2. So if that's the sort of like legacy I leave behind and how I coach people and how I do things, like that'd be awesome to me, is that I've enhanced the time of someone's life because they have to spend as much time I did learning something that they should have learnt sooner. And that's probably a pretty great way to coach in my perspective. As to posing, why is posing so important? It's kind of the equivalent of, like, let's put it in other sport terms. Powerlifting, you've got a really good squat and bench, but you've got a terrible deadlift. Like, not learning how to deadlift when you're doing a 3-lift meet is just fucking silly. It's the equivalent of not knowing how to change gears when you're driving like race cars. Like, you've done all the work in, you know, being optimal to drive the car and being in the best position to drive the car and you're whatever, but you're terrible at fucking shifting gears. Like, is that one, you know, there's minute details that add up at the end of your race where it's like, okay, that happened over every shift, over every turn. Well, now you're seconds upon seconds behind the guy in the front. And, you know, that sort of shit starts to add up. It's literally that when it comes to bodybuilding. You're a halfback who's failed to learn how to kick, you know, a torpedo or a long field kick or a grubber. Like, it's one of the necessary tools to the game. You spend 6 months building your physique or cutting your physique down, 12 months in the gym training your ass off, eating all the food. You have the foundation built, but you're choosing not to present it. It's the fucking Mona Lisa with a fucking sheet over it so you can't see it. Like, what's the point? You're trying to show, it is a show, it's a pageantry show, as much as everyone gives it shit, that you're displaying what you've done. So not learning how to pose effectively in your best positions is leaving stuff on the table that's going to get you a result. At the end of the day, no one gives a fuck about how hard you prepped. The judges care about what you present on the day. So you can have the best looking physique on Instagram, but come show day you can't present it, they don't care. You lose to the guy next to you who's probably a little bit less, but knows how to pose it better. I would rather, if I had the choice, I'd rather be a 98% physique and present it perfectly than 100% physique and present it terribly. And that's pretty much where, like, that can't be any clearer as to why posing is so important. Stop waiting till 4 weeks out from your fucking show to think you're gonna learn how to do quarter turns. I've got guys 6 months out, 18 months out, 12 months out that are struggling to get their quarter turns now, so we're doing it so that they get comfortable when it comes time to being hungry and tired. Think about motor coordination when you're depleted and hungry. You're not learning a new skill when you're tired. Anyway, that's my rant on that.
Hey, ask me how I did it, I'm telling them grace. Ask me
How do we map out the ideal prep? Again, it's working back from optimal. As much as I don't like the word, mapping out something like prep does need to be optimal as possible. So you're gonna map out, like, the way we look at it, which makes the most sense. It used to be a 12 to 14 week prep, used to be the old bro school way of doing things. You just aggressive, send it, dig as hard as you can, get shredded. The issue is what we're trying to avoid in that aspect is the greater your deficit, the faster you cut, the more potentiation for muscle wastage that you have, or muscle atrophy. The body's gonna eat muscle tissue and we're gonna lose muscle mass for the stage. If the goal is to bring the biggest, most conditioned version of yourself, that means retaining muscle. So 12 weeks aggressively cutting at, you know, a 50, 60% deficit, not ideal. So what we do is use almost like 12 to 14 weeks as a baseline. That's our template. Now from there, what's the experience of the client? They're brand new. Okay, so I'm gonna add 2 more weeks to that. Do they have life events coming up? Yep, I'm gonna add a week per thing that's coming up. So, you know, do they have like a wedding in there? Is there a holiday? Is there a trip? Is there, you know, things that we can plan as diet breaks or maintenance weeks to offset some of the fatigue? Okay, so we'll add a week for each one of those. So now we're at 16 weeks. You know, where are they at in their life events? Is work busy? Is their studies increased? Is something like that? Okay, so there's gonna be a high yield of stress. Add a few more weeks. Suddenly that 12-week prep's now at 20, 24, 26 weeks long. Then we have what you might call the pre-prep tidy up phase, which is basically, you know, in some off-season aspects, we get pretty soft, we get, you know, like motivation a bit lower, things like that, so we tidy up a bit. We might increase adherence from 90% to 95, drop some body fat, increase all the metrics like, you know, no more going out for a little while, we're tidying up the sleep, we're tidying up the food. Okay, so now we've got that, so it's about 30 weeks overall, depending on the person. Now from there, we're looking at, okay, well, how much muscle mass do they have, how much, what's their size, what's their body composition, how much body fat do they have to lose, what's their weight, is there a weight cap, what's the look we're trying to bring? Okay, so we know that this person has a large or larger degree of body fat. We want to look at relatively no more than 1% of body fat loss per week to maintain the least aggressive but still aggressive phase. That's on average over your 20, 25, 30 weeks. Realistically, what I like to encourage is when energy availability is the highest, you're going to look at an aggressive front end of your cut. So people talking about refeeds and potentiating maintenance weeks and diet breaks during the first 4 to 6 weeks, suck it up, you don't need it. Unless you do high-low days, like I did a high-low day, but my deficit was very aggressive, you don't need diet breaks in the first 4 to 6 weeks of your prep because you have so much energy available. That's the point. We're trying to drive you into being flat. So first 4 to 6 weeks is fucking aggressive. Then from there, you might do a maintenance break. You might do a diet break or a refeed. Okay, let's get some food back up. Now we're gonna decrease the deficit, so it's not gonna be as drastic. And we're gonna titrate that down in conjunction with increasing maybe set volume, increasing intensity in training. We're trying to maintain as much tension as possible, as much aggression as possible with control. Now we're gonna get to points where we're probably looking at a deload. So we're gonna tie in a deload with our next diet break. And then from there, we're just gradually titrating down food in response to changes in composition. So are we plateauing after a couple of weeks? Is weight loss stalling? Is fat composition stalling? If so, easy, pull down some food, or we increase cardio, increase output slightly. Is all other factors being accounted for, sleep, all that sort of shit. Very simple, like a really easy template to go by in that regard, if all things are ideal. And then we sort of, you know, hit another diet break or a refeed, deload phase. Then we look at cruising into the show. So we're trying to, at the back end, we're trying to decrease stress, increase food or increase relaxation so that we're reducing fatigue. So we're trying to pull down fatigue by reducing stress, and usually that's done by increasing rest or diet breaks, deloads, high amounts of food, relaxing a little bit on cardio. Ideally, the back end of prep, you're a bit more controlled, you're already in condition, you're just tidying it up. So realistically, that's kind of how we're looking at it. Really big drop, slight maintenance, drop again, decrease the fatigue by increasing your food. Really simple as that. And then obviously you have your protocols and stuff to come into a show. So in an ideal sense, that's how you map it out relatively for a beginner. But yeah, that's pretty much how, as simple as you can kind of look at it. You know, again, that's not secret sauce or fucking magic science. It's just the most logical approach to it. Hitting a newbie with a 12-week cut and absolutely no food is the fastest way to build an eating disorder. And I'm already sick of hearing the bodybuilding does that, so make it smarter. Alrighty guys, so that was a leg day one at the back end of our mini cut. Don't forget that coaching spots are still available. If you're keen to work with us or curious on how we do things or what the Matter system actually is, book in your free consult. The link is in our bios, the link is on our website, or you can find it on my Instagram in the link tree and book a free 60-minute call with one of the coaches. Talk soon.